Parents Kept in the Dark Over Gender, a fascinating report published today by Policy Exchange, in which it says that basically schools in this country are routinely allowing children to switch genders, not telling their parents, in what they call a mass breach of safeguarding. This is an extraordinary story. We hear now, I think, that something like 25% of children in secondary schools in this country consider themselves to be non-binary. Let's find out what's going on. Iain, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mike.
Thank you very much indeed. This is a very worthy report from Policy Exchange, and an extraordinary one, I think, for an awful lot of parents who will be saying, how is it possible that I'm sending my child to school where they're supposed to be learning about all manner of things, from history to English to maths, to prepare for GCSEs and A-levels and all of that. But instead, what they're finding is that an awful lot of them are being encouraged to consider changing their gender at worst.
Absolutely. I think what this report has done is, for the first time, it's exposed the scale of these problems in our schools. And what we are seeing is that there are well-established principles around safeguarding which are being disregarded when it comes to dealing with questions of gender. Some of the key things we found out, we wrote freedom of information requests to over 300 schools, and we found out that 28% of schools were not reliably informing parents if their child experienced gender distress. And we found schools doing things like promising confidentiality to a child, which you never do in a safeguarding case. We found that 1 in 4 schools were teaching that children that they may be born in the wrong bodies. And we found that 4 in 10 schools are operating a process of self-ID, despite the government actually rejecting that in law. Schools seem to be very, very confused about this issue, and what they're doing is not compatible with their safeguarding duties.
Isn't it strange that we have come to this point? Because generally speaking, if my son gets a detention, I get an email from the school immediately to say that he's got a detention. But if, for example, he was to say, I'm thinking I might be born in the wrong body, presumably they wouldn't send me an email.
Well, it depends on the school. Some schools are acting appropriately, but I think it's a very good thing you said. I mean, you need to sign a permission slip for your child to be given, paracetamol, for example, usually in schools. But you may find that in some schools, your child could have reported gender distress, have socially transitioned, and be being called by a different name without the parent being informed. And how can that be right?
Yeah, it does seem very strange. I mean, it's certainly true to say that a lot of younger people have a different view of this. I've got 2 teenage sons currently in school. One of them sort of goes along with it to some extent and has admitted that he's been taught the whole 72 genders thing. Another one is a little bit less likely to believe all that. But certainly there's something going on, and I wonder what it is. I mean, what do you think is causing schools to go so far down this particular road?
So I think a lot of teachers and head teachers are confused, they're worried, they think they're trying to do the right thing, they're trying to be kind, and what they've lost sight of, if they've lost sight of some of these core safeguarding principles about involving parents, about not promising confidentiality to a child, about following the evidence, about a whole school safeguarding approach. I mean, we had recently the CAS report into some of what was going on at the gender identity clinic in Tavistock, which found some really grievous failings there at that gender identity clinic. And what seems like happening is that in far too many schools, we're going down that same path of ignoring the principles that we know best to look after children in pursuit of this very contested, this very radical ideology.
Yes, because we've got, from your report, 40% of schools operating policies of gender self-identification and 69% of schools requiring other children to affirm the pupil's new identity. And I've heard stories like that from people that have called into this show, where some of their children have got into trouble because they've refused to recognise somebody else in the class as having changed their gender.
I think it becomes even more serious then when you look at how, we've got around 1 in 4 schools which are not maintaining single-sex spaces, such as changing rooms or toilets, which of course they are required to do in law. I mean, this is not saying that, you can't create a different area where, some children who may be experiencing this distress may get changed. But that right to single-sex spaces is very important.
Yes.
We've got vulnerable children going through puberty, young girls going through puberty, vulnerable and being forced to share changing rooms with, with biological males.
Yes,
that can't be.
And we've seen already cases where that has gone pretty badly wrong, where a lot of children are mixing in areas where they shouldn't really be mixing. A lot of girls getting embarrassed by boys trying to take pictures of them and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right, I think, to say that they're doing it probably not out of a sense of mischief or badness. They're trying to be good, but it sort of tells you how confused our society has become, because in order not to offend anyone at all, people are actually offending everyone.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the things we found is that, I think a lot of teachers maybe feel quite uncomfortable or not confident in doing this. And what they've effectively done is they've outsourced this almost to campaigning charitable organisations which are pushing very sort of unsavoury material which is not in keeping with the government's guidelines on this, which are promoting very strange ideas around gender that actually, put children at risk. And these have almost been imported hook, line and sinker without the school taking responsibility for its ultimate safeguarding responsibilities in terms of what's taught, what its policies are, and how to protect children and act in accordance with the law.
And as you are looking at the law and how the law actually operates, I mean, what can a parent do, for example, if he or she were to discover that something had happened in the school regarding their own child's gender and their own child's kind of view? I mean, do parents have rights here?
Yes, they do. They do, and I think parents should be forthright about those and demanding to know what is happening. Parents do have a right to see RSHE materials. They have to go onto the school premises at the moment. We don't think that's acceptable in our report. We say all the materials that are taught should be published online, but as it is, you can at least see them if you go onto the school premises. And we're also calling for an independent review, which can't happen. It can't happen soon enough, really. There's a proper independent review going into schools and looking at how we got here. And I think, as my colleague Lottie Moore, who wrote the report, said, this has all come up in the last 5 years. It's been very sudden. There's been no real debate on this, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
I mean, a similar thing's happening in America, isn't it, where you've got people like Ron DeSantis kind of not interfering, but saying, look, traditionally families should have more of a role in knowing what their kids' sex education is, for a start. And certainly there was a backlash, I think, in Virginia, where a governor stood for families and said, look, we cannot have this, kind of gender reassignment teaching going on, because it's not what we expect. And so there has been a sort of political backlash, if you like, in America. There hasn't quite been that here yet.
Not yet. And I think absolute transparency is what I would say. I think if you ever get to a situation where a school or an external organisation says, we will not let parents see what we're teaching their children, that is very obviously suspicious.
Yes.
What have they got to hide? You should be comfortable showing parents what your children are being taught, whether that's in maths or in history, and the same in RSHE. If someone will not show parents what their children are being taught, I think we have a right to be suspicious there.
Yeah, and what if you say to the school, I'd rather my child wasn't in those particular classes? Can you do that? Can you opt out of them?
Unfortunately, you can't. The government removed the right to opt out out of these recently, 2 or 3 years ago. So you don't have that right, unfortunately. But I think I would focus less on that and more about getting the system to work for everyone.
Yes. OK. Well, the report is available, I dare say, if anybody wants to actually get their hands on the whole thing. Where do they do that?
On our website, if you type in Policy Exchange, it will be into Google. You'll find it.
OK.